Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are settling in with a filmmaker who is, well, he's basically a master of mood. This is the man who took a simple, affordable sheet metal mask and made it the face of existential terror.
Right.
And whose minimalist synth scores, they define the sound of dread for generations. We are talking about the American filmmaker, composer, and actor, John Howard Carpenter.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look across Carpenter's expansive and really eclectic filmography, you see this incredible fusion of genres, horror, action, science fiction.
All mixed together.
Exactly, but all filtered through this lens that is just fiercely independent and visually uncompromising. It's a sensibility that Hollywood, well, they struggled to understand for decades, but now it's everywhere.
That distinction, right, between the genre master and the studio outsider, that's so key to his whole story.
It really is.
I love how the French Directors Guild captured that tension when they recognized him. It was the Golden Coach Award in 2019.
That's the one.
And they specifically called him a creative genius of raw, fantastic, and spectacular emotions.
Which is perfect.
It totally encapsulates that pure, visceral energy he injects into his work. Doesn't matter what the budget is.
It really does. And our mission today is to go deep into that eclectic career. We want to focus on exactly how he managed to blend those genres that seem so different.
Right.
How he defined multiple cinematic blueprints, the modern slasher, the siege thriller.
Big ones.
Huge. And all while operating mostly outside the major studio system. We need to understand why he was so often, critically dismissed when the films came out.
Only to be called masterpieces later.
Exactly. Years later. It's fascinating.
It truly is a remarkable arc, a journey, marked by these initial smash hits, then followed by commercial disappointments.
That bomb, dude.
That were later elevated to cult status. And that elevation, it's still happening today. Speaking of current recognition, it's worth noting his recent milestones. That Golden Coach in 2019, and a really well-deserved star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame just recently, April 3rd, 2025.
Finally.
It shows the establishment is finally catching up to, the generations of fans and critics who already knew he was a genius.
It's validation, absolutely.
Yeah.
But validation, that was, decades overdue in some cases.
True.
His story is one of an artist whose technical innovations and, frankly, his bleak worldview were just maybe too advanced for the mainstream audience back in the early 80s.
Okay, let's unpack this journey. Let's start at the very beginning, the blueprint, of the genre master. John Howard Carpenter, born in Carthage, New York, 1948.
Right.
But his real formative years were spent steeped in a very different culture. His family moved to Bowling Green, Kentucky in 1953. And this shift, it really established the foundation for his dual identity, right? Filmmaker and composer.
That geographic detail, it's often overlooked, but it's really important. His father, Howard Ralph Carpenter, was a music professor.
The key.
That's the crucial clue, yeah, to the other half of John Carpenter's creative output. And for much of his childhood, the family actually lived in a log cabin.
Get out! Really?
Yeah, a log cabin on the Western Kentucky University campus.
A log cabin on a college campus. That image just screams future independent auteur, doesn't it? Sort of intellectual, but also earthy.
It really does. And this environment, it definitely shaped his vision.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just academic or highbrow stuff he was taking in.
No, he was consuming pure genre filmmaking.
Precisely. His formative influences were wonderfully eclectic, a real mix of high craft and low camp.
Okay.
He was captivated by the classic Westerns, especially the rigorous, confined, efficient narratives of masters like Howard Hawks and John Ford.
Structure.
Those films taught him structure and economy. Absolutely.
And that whole idea of the isolated hero facing this overwhelming threat that defines so many of his films.
Oh, totally. Assault on Precinct 13, Escape from New York, it's right there.
Yeah.
But just as important were the B-movies, the 1950s low-budget horror and sci-fi.
Okay.
He frequently cited The Thing from Another World, the 1951 version, as pivotal.
Which is ironic, given
he would later remake it. Exactly. He loved how those films generated so much paranoia from, minimal resources. And then you had the big-budget spectacles, too, offering grand scale. Things like Godzilla and the more cerebral space opera Forbidden Planet.
So it's at that blend, right? The sturdy Western structure, the engine with the paranoia and atmosphere of cheap sci-fi. That feels like the core DNA of the Carpenter style.
That's a great way to put it. And we know he didn't waste any time applying these influences.
No kidding.
Not at all. That creative engine was firing early. Before he even started high school, he was making 8mm short films, practicing special effects, narrative efficiency. We even know specific titles. Just before he turned 14, around 62, he made this delightfully ambitious claymation short called Godzilla vs. Gorgo.
Claymation Godzilla, that's commitment.
Total commitment to genre storytelling, almost immediately.
So Kentucky didn't have a big filmmaking program back then?
No, not really, which necessitated a pretty significant move to the West Coast.
Right.
He headed to California to attend the USC School of Cinematic Arts, starting in 1968. But in classic Carpenter fashion, mirroring that independent streak of his heroes.
He didn't stick around for the diploma?
Nope. Dropped out in his final semester, couldn't wait to get out and start shooting.
Wow.
He left to make his first feature film, fully embracing that role of the independent artist. But his time at USC, it left us with two incredibly important early clues.
Okay, the first being that very early success in 1970.
Yes, exactly. His collaboration on The Resurrection of Bronco Billy. He was co-writer, editor, and composer on that.
And it won an Oscar.
It won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film. An Oscar win right at the beginning of his career before he'd even directed a single feature.
That's a huge early sign, isn't it? About the sheer range of his talent. Music, editing.
Everything. But the second clue is maybe even more chillingly prophetic.
Yeah.
That would be the rediscovered short film, Captain Voyeur. He wrote and directed that in '69 while still at USC.
Okay.
This short, it was thought lost for years. It's fascinating because it shows he was already exploring the psychological terror, the visual cues.
That would define Halloween.
Exactly. Wow. The foundation for the silent, stalking terror of Michael Myers was being laid down right there in film school.
Okay, jumping into the 1970s, this is where Carpenter really establishes himself as that true independent spirit, the ultimate, multi-hyphenate.
Totally.
His first feature as director was Dark Star, 1974. And this was a passion project, right? Cost almost nothing.
Reports put the budget around $60,000, which is basically, pocket change, even in the 70s.
Crazy.
It was a science fiction comedy that started as a student film, and it was a massive DIY undertaking. He co-wrote it with Dan O'Bannon.
The alien guy.
The alien guy. And Carpenter handled writing, producing, directing, and the score. Did it all.
And what's crucial here is that Dark Star served as this low-budget sandbox for two future blockbuster franchises.
Absolutely. O'Bannon handled the special effects, but he was simultaneously developing the core ideas of the film. Crews stuck in space, alien threat, existential dread.
Which he would reuse.
Which he would later recycle and refine for Alien. Dark Star basically gave birth to Alien. O'Bannon went on to write the '79 masterpiece, carrying over concepts and imagery from his work with Carpenter.
Amazing.
Plus, O'Bannon's special effects work also caught the eye of George Lucas, leading him directly into working on Star Wars. So this tiny, scrappy sci-fi comedy influences two of the biggest franchises in genre history. That low-budget efficiency was clearly a breeding ground for genius.
That efficiency quickly translated into his next major effort, Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976. This is where he fully realizes the potential of blending those foundational influences we talked about.
This film is the ultimate urban western. It takes the premise of a siege Western small group, defending one spot against overwhelming, faceless odds, and drops it right into the desolate streets of contemporary. Carpenter himself credited Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo as the direct structural influence.
And he went deep into that homage, didn't he? He didn't just borrow the plot, he borrowed the personality.
How so?
Well, he handled writing, directing, and score, but he also edited it under the pseudonym John T. Chance.
The name of John Wayne's character in Rio Bravo.
Exactly. I think that detail just shows how much he respected that classic genre structure.
It speaks to his reverence for cinematic history, for sure. And he considered this his first real film.
Not because of the content, but
because it was the first project he filmed on a real shooting schedule. It proved he could function professionally. That experience set the stage perfectly for his next film, the true phenomenon that would change horror cinema forever.
Halloween, 1978. I mean, it defined the slasher genre, but its origins are famously humble.
So humble.
Started as a pitch from producer Irwin Yablans, initially titled The Babysitter Murders, kind of generic.
Right. And Yablans made the crucial suggestion, set the action on Halloween night, which Carpenter, always the pragmatist, called true crass exploitation. He saw the film's potential as basically just a profitable haunted house film built on cheap tricks. but man, it was exploitation executed with staggering intelligence.
And those cheap tricks worked spectacularly. The key was that low budget. Only $300,000.
Unbelievable.
It forced creativity, efficiency. The budget was so tight, the source material notes the actors had to provide their own costumes.
Which is why Michael Myers' mask is just a cheap Captain Kirk mask, spray-painted white and messed with.
Exactly. It's the ultimate lesson in less is more filmmaking. It grossed over $65 million initially.
Insane return.
Becoming one of the most successful independent films ever made, and essentially inventing the economic model for the modern horror film.
And the style wasn't entirely out of nowhere, of course. Carpenter noted influences from, like, the hyper-stylized gore of Dario Argento's Suspiria.
Okay.
And the deep psychological horror of William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
Oh. But the real genius, I think, outside of the staging, is the score. Carpenter's self-composed Halloween theme. It's iconic because it's so deceptively simple.
That 54-meter piano.
Yeah, just repetitive. It provides this mechanical, relentless, almost alien sense of inevitability that perfectly matches the character of Michael Myers.
That score is the character's heartbeat. It really is. And we absolutely have to address the long-running, often kind of tiresome allegory debate.
Oh, God, yes. The academic interpretation that the film is this strict morality tale, an allegory about sexual purity, right? Punishment for casual sex, given who Michael targets.
It's an interpretation that gained massive traction over the years, but Carpenter himself has strongly, consistently pushed back against it.
What do you say?
He stated explicitly the sexual morality wasn't his intention. He said, "In Halloween, I viewed the characters as simply normal teenagers.
Yeah.
Just normal kids."
That's vital context for you listening. The film's power wasn't from some didactic lesson, but from pure, brilliant, terrifying efficiency. This idea of a senseless evil that just is.
Exactly. After Halloween's success, Carpenter started bridging that gap between his indie roots and Hollywood.
Right. He directed the 1979 television film Elvis,
which marked the first of his many legendary collaborations with Kurt Russell.
A beautiful partnership.
And just before that, in 1978, he got his first major studio credit, Eyes of Laura Mars, a thriller directed by Irvin Kershner.
Yeah.
Was adapted from Carpenter's original spec script.
Yep.
So by the end of the decade, he had an Oscar, a genre-defining smash hit, and a firm foothold inside the studio system, setting him up for the tumultuous 1980s.
The 1980s started strong for Carpenter, absolutely, but quickly devolved into this commercial and critical roller coaster that really cemented his status as maybe a misunderstood artist.
Yeah, that's fair. The decade kicked off with The Fog in 1980.
Ghost story.
Ghostly revenge tale he co-wrote with Debra Hill. Drew inspiration from horror comics like Tales from the Crypt and the classic creature feature The Crawling Eye.
Okay.
Interestingly, despite the proven talent involved, Carpenter found the production unusually difficult. He wasn't satisfied.
He admitted dissatisfaction after seeing the rough cut, right? Felt he had to salvage the film.
Yeah, he rushed back to shoot additional, more graphic footage, including a new prologue narrated by John Houseman. Said it was the only time he ever felt compelled to do that in his career.
Wow. That's telling.
It was a difficult process, but despite the production issues and, mostly negative critical reception at the time, critics called it too conventional, it was still a commercial success.
How'd it do?
Made on just $1 million, grossed over $21 million in the U.S. So even if Carpenter himself later called it a minor horror classic, it showed he was commercially viable.
And from coastal horror, he pivoted sharply into dystopian action with Escape from New York in 1981. Another massive success gave us the iconic anti-hero, Snake Plissken.
Oh yeah, this film hit all the right notes. Commercial success, over $25 million gross.
Nice.
Critical acclaim, holds a high approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's amazing.
And more importantly, it showcased his growing, reliable repertoire of recurring collaborators. The gang. Kurt Russell embodying that cool cynicism of Plissken alongside Donald Pleasance, Adrienne Barbeau, Tom Atkins, Charles Cyphers. It gave his world consistency.
Okay, here is where the story gets really interesting, though. 1982. He released what many people consider his ultimate artistic statement, The Thing.
Masterpiece.
Yet it was a catastrophic failure at the time, just bombed.
The production for The Thing was meticulous, high caliber, really contrasted sharply with his earlier low-budget stuff.
How so?
It boasted innovative, totally groundbreaking body horror special effects by the legendary Rob Bottin.
Unforgettable stuff.
A tense, unsettling score by Ennio Morricone. High production values overall. And crucially, Carpenter's version distinguished itself by being highly faithful to the original John W. Campbell Jr. novella, Who Goes There?
Right, it wasn't really a remake of the 51 film.
Not really. It shifted the focus from the 51 film's physical monster to the novella's theme of internal paranoia, the shape-shifting, the not knowing who to trust.
The paranoia is what makes that film so bleak, so chilling. He also designated The Thing as the start of what he called his Apocalypse trilogy.
Right, along with Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness.
And what unified them.
Their shared characteristic of bleak, nihilistic conclusions. The world usually ends or the survivors are completely compromised. No happy endings here.
And that bleak nihilistic viewpoint was precisely what torpedoed its box office performance. The timing was just historically brutal.
Oh, it was the worst. The Thing was graphic, sinister, deeply cynical horror film, released just 2 weeks after the cultural phenomenon that was Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
That contrast couldn't be starker, could it? E.T. offered this optimistic, family-friendly, hugely profitable take on alien visitation.
Totally dominated the cultural landscape. Fulfilled that post-Vietnam Watergate need for gentle escapism.
And Carpenter offered the absolute opposite. A vision where trust is impossible and humanity literally devours itself.
The industry and the public wanted optimism, and Carpenter delivered a cold shower of existential dread. The fallout was swift and severe.
What happened?
He lost confidence. Later admitted he knew the film was strong, but didn't realize it would be too strong. Said he didn't take the public's taste into consideration. Critics famously attacked him. One called him a pornographer of violence.
Ouch! And the professional damage was concrete, right?
Oh, yeah. Universal Pictures bought him out of his multiple film contract, essentially declared his vision commercially toxic. He also lost the job directing the film adaptation of Stephen King's Firestarter. Must have been devastating.
Career-changing, definitely. Forcing him to reevaluate everything. But the story of The Thing is the ultimate example of critical reappraisal.
Absolutely. Years past, the film found this massive, appreciative audience on home video, on television.
It did. Critics and genre fans began to reevaluate it, not as gore for gore's sake, but as an incredibly taut, beautifully constructed thriller.
He was eventually called one of the greatest and most elegantly constructed B-movies ever made, and a peerless masterpiece of relentless suspense. It's the quintessential example of an artist being just too far ahead of the cultural curve.
Following that crushing blow, the pragmatist in him took over.
Had to.
He immediately pivoted to directing Christine in 1983, the Stephen King adaptation. And he was pretty blunt about why, wasn't he?
Brutally honest. Stated he directed it because, after The Thing, quote, it was the only thing offered to him at the time.
Wow. Sounds like a director forced to prove he could be a reliable studio workhorse again.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yet he pulled off a respectable effort, did solid business, and then managed to shift gears entirely for Starman in 1984.
Which showed his versatility.
Totally. Starman was a romantic sci-fi film, completely contrasting his previous work. Carpenter's vision was to make it a romantic comedy, like in the vein of the classic Frank Capra film. It happened one night.
Okay.
But with a space alien learning human emotion.
And it worked.
It was a critical success. Earned favorable reviews, landed Jeff Bridges' Oscar and Golden Globe nominations for his portrayal of Starman.
Wow.
It demonstrated Carpenter could handle strong emotional connection, character nuance, not just action and horror. Looked like the comeback was complete.
Unfortunately, the high notes didn't last. The momentum stalled pretty dramatically with the financial failure of the big-budget action comedy Big Trouble in Little China in 1986.
Another one that bombed initially, but now, huge cult classic.
Exactly. But its failure forced him back into that low-budget, independent filmmaking model he was trying to escape.
Led to films like the dense philosophical horror Prince of Darkness in '87 and the eventual cult success They Live in '88. The '80s were truly the defining decade of peaks, valleys, and near-fatal career crashes for him.
Okay, as we transition into discussing his signature style, it's impossible to talk about John Carpenter without recognizing the efficiency and flair of his visual choices and, of course, his incredible music.
Indelible music.
Let's start with the visual side.
Okay. He possesses a signature visual language that is just immediately recognizable. His style relies on minimalist lighting and photography.
Lots of shadows.
Deep shadows, high contrast, which enhances that feeling of dread, of isolation. He also uses extensive Steadicam.
Right, those smooth, flowing shots.
Gives his films a fluid, restless perspective. And he favors wide panoramic shots.
And he was an outspoken proponent of a very specific classical technical format. Panavision anamorphic cinematography.
Yes.
That incredibly wide 2.39:1 aspect ratio for almost all his films.
This is a crucial detail, especially given his low-budget roots. He wasn't afraid to use expensive equipment to get his specific aesthetic. He called Panavision anamorphic the best movie system there is.
Really preferred it over digital or 3D.
Vehemently.
Why is that hyper-wide scope so effective for his style, especially horror? What does that 2.39:1 ratio do?
Well, it creates a specific type of suspense. When you have such a wide frame, it forces your eye, the viewer's eye, to actively scan the edges.
For threats.
Exactly. It allows him to use negative space, shadows, to suggest threats lurking just outside the immediate action. It emphasizes isolation. The characters look tiny, vulnerable against these vast, empty landscapes, whether it's space or a desolate city street.
Perfect for the siege mentality.
Totally defines his work. The only major exceptions where he didn't use Panavision were his earliest work, Dark Star, and his most recent feature, The Ward.
That commitment to a classical, technically demanding visual style is one half of the equation. The other half, the immediate connection to the viewer, is the music.
Oh, the music.
He is nearly always the composer or co-composer for his films, sometimes even just providing the score outline.
That musical interest, as we noted, was ignited by his father's work as a music teacher. It's an inseparable part of his identity as an auteur.
And he was a pioneer with synthesizers, right?
Huge pioneer. An early adopter, starting right back with Dark Star, where he famously used an EMS VCS-3 synth.
The VCS-3, what was special about that?
It was one of the earliest commercially available modular synthesizers. Pretty cutting edge for the time.
And why did he use these often unconventional early electronic instruments?
Well, he used them for a purely pragmatic, low-budget reason, but the result was revolutionary. He needed a way to sound big with just a keyboard.
Couldn't afford an orchestra.
Exactly. So he found a tool that could generate huge, atmospheric, and distinctly electronic soundscapes with minimal equipment. This gave his films that mechanical, cold, almost inhuman feel.
Which perfectly matched his narratives about external implacable forces.
Bingo. And his scores became immediate cult items for collectors. His longtime professional partner in sound was the musician Alan Howarth.
Right. What was their dynamic like?
Howarth was essential. While Carpenter provided the melodies, the composition, the creative framework, Howarth handled technical execution, the recording, the sequencing, refining the often temperamental early synth tech.
So vision and execution.
Perfect blend. Today, he's passed that collaborative torch to his son, Cody Carpenter, and his godson, Daniel Davies.
And this commitment paid off musically, beyond creating the most recognizable theme in horror history with Halloween.
Which is saying something.
He also won a Saturn Award for Best Music for the soundtrack of Vampires in 1998.
And beyond the technical and musical collaborators, his personal life formed this tight-knit family unit that worked across his filmography. He really relied on this familiar network when the Hollywood system kind of turned its back on him.
Yeah, his personal relationships were professional partnerships, too. He was married to actress Adrienne Barbeau from 79 to 84.
Who was key in The Fog and Escape from New York.
Great. And their son, Cody Carpenter, is now his frequent musical collaborator.
And since 1990, he's been married to film producer Sandy King. She became integral to his mid to late career, producing several later films, including In the Mouth of Madness and Vampires.
And they even have a comic book company together.
Yeah, Storm King Comics. Continuing that independent creative spirit outside of traditional film.
And, of course, the consistent faces he kept bringing back, Kurt Russell, Donald Pleasance, Charles Cyphers.
Those collaborators gave his films a reliable, shared shorthand, a sense of continuity that was vital for an independent guy working in the studio margins.
So that financial disappointment from Big Trouble in Little China meant the 1990s continued that pattern of critical struggle, even when he dove deep into cosmic horror. Films like Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Village of the Damned, they didn't really achieve the commercial traction of his earlier work.
No, they didn't. But again, time has been kind. His 1994 film, In the Mouth of Madness, is maybe the best Lovecraftian homage ever put to film. It plays with themes of sanity dissolving, the nature of reality itself breaking down.
It's an incredibly dense, scary film. But it was initially unsuccessful, right? Both critically and commercially. Why do you think that film in particular failed to find an audience then?
Because it deals with genuinely terrifying cosmic concepts. Lovecraftian horror isn't really about jump scares. It's about the erosion of the mind.
Yeah, it gets under your skin.
The narrative uses an unreliable narrator, asks the audience to accept that the protagonist's reality, and by extension your reality as the viewer, is being actively written by this external insane force. That level of philosophical nihilism. It was still a hard sell to 90s audiences looking for simpler thrills.
But now,
massive cult following. Deservedly so.
He also returned to his iconic anti-hero with Escape from L.A. in 1996. Mixed reviews again.
Mixed reviews, yeah, but it also built a strong cult audience over time, shows the lasting appeal of Kurt Russell's Snake Plissken.
Definitely. After Ghosts of Mars in 2001, he had a long directorial hiatus from features, didn't he?
He did. Directed a couple of episodes for Showtime's Masters of Horror series, which were great. And then his last major film, The Ward, came out in 2010.
The Ward, with Amber Heard. How did that do?
Premiered to generally poor reviews, lost money at the box office, and crucially, as of 2025, it remains the most recent feature film he has directed.
But this period of cinematic silence led directly to one of the most exciting artistic rebirths of his career, his music.
The focus shift since the 2010s has been magnificent. He turned his attention heavily to his solo albums, the Lost Themes series, Thankto 3, Alive After Death, and the recent Lost Themes, The Fourth Moir.
Co-written with his son and godson.
Right, Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies. Released by Sacred Bones Records.
What makes these Lost Themes albums different from his film scores?
Well, the music is unshackled from a specific narrative. His scores, while great, were functional. They had to serve the needs of Halloween or The Fog.
Right.
The Lost Themes albums are music for films that exist only in your head, the listener's head. They're expansive, atmospheric, and allowed him to further explore those synth textures and melodic minimalism he pioneered.
And this renewed interest in his unique sound, which was helped by Death Waltz Records reissuing his old soundtracks.
Which were really sought after by collectors.
It was so great that it prompted him, for the first time ever, to start touring as a musician.
Which is phenomenal. He went from this reluctant, behind-the-scenes composer to a touring rock star, playing both his classic scores and new material to massive crowds.
Became an acknowledged primary influence on a whole generation of electronic musicians.
Cemented that status by narrating the documentary The Rise of the Synths, highlighting his massive foundational contribution to the entire synthwave genre.
Which basically uses his signature sound as its primary building block.
Absolutely. That resurgence of influence also brought him back to his most famous creation. Since 2018, he's returned to the Halloween franchise.
In what capacity?
Executive producer, co-composer, creative consultant for the films released in 2018, 2021, and 2022. And the 2018 film famously ignored the continuity of all the previous sequels.
To be a direct sequel to the 78 original.
Exactly. Bring it full circle.
He's certainly embraced modern media, too. He's famously a huge fan of video games.
Oh yeah, big-time gamer.
Citing admiration for the pacing of Sonic the Hedgehog games.
Love Sonic.
The platforming of Jak and Daxter, the scale of Fallout 76. He even served as narrator and story consultant for the sci-fi horror game series FEAR.
And he expressed strong interest in making a film based on the video game Dead Space, which would be amazing.
Oh man, yes please.
And while he's been focused on music, he did return to directing recently, in 2023. Helmed an episode of the Peacock series Suburban Screams.
Okay.
And he's currently working on the story and score for the 2026 video game Toxic Commando. So the creative engine, whether it's film, music, or gaming, it's still running strong.
It's also worth noting his public views, which often reflect that anti-establishment nature of his films.
Definitely.
He's described his political stance as inconsistent, famously anti-authority figures, yet surprisingly maybe in favor of big government. And he's been an outspoken critic of unrestrained capitalism.
That anti-establishment streak, packaged with his distinct visual and audio signature, has ensured his lasting foundational legacy. His influence is immense, spanning across genres, from indie horror to huge action movies.
You see that influence everywhere. James Cameron's tight action structures owe a debt to Carpenter's efficient narratives.
Guillermo del Toro, Edgar Wright consistently cite him.
And we know Quentin Tarantino heavily cited The Thing as a key influence on the visual language and sense of confinement in The Hateful Eight.
Even massive streaming successes today, like the Duffer Brothers with Stranger Things, they cite Carpenter, alongside Spielberg and King, as primary influences.
It really confirms that the commercial failures of the 80s were just a temporary roadblock in recognizing his genius.
Absolutely. And the ultimate stamp of significance outside of the box office, Halloween was selected for preservation in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry back in 2006.
So what does this all mean for us, the audience? If we summarize John Carpenter's remarkable career arc, We see someone who started as this low-budget auteur, a true multi-hyphenate director, composer, editor, writer,
Did it all.
whose greatest, most distinctive films, like The Thing, often experienced initial brutal commercial failure.
But time has validated his unblinking vision. He transitioned from a struggling independent filmmaker, forced out of his contract, to a celebrated genre master whose defining aesthetic and compositional style shaped decades of horror and sci-fi.
His work was celebrated years later through critical reappraisal, eventually earning him major accolades like that star on the Walk of Fame.
Finally.
The true enduring genius really lies in the synergy, and maybe the contradiction, between his film craft and his music. And here is our final provocative thought for you to chew on, connecting those two elements. Consider the fundamental paradox in his artistic methodology.
Okay. Visually, for his cinematography, he insisted on using the most complex, expensive, classical cinematic format, that 35mm Panavision anamorphic.
Called it the best movie system there is. Dedicated his career to its hyper-wide scope.
Yet musically, he opted for the cheapest, simplest, most efficient tools available. Simple, early synthesizers like the VCS-3.
With the sole pragmatic purpose of making the music sound big with just a keyboard?
This contrast, demanding the best, widest visual technology to capture isolation while embracing the most minimal, cold audio technology to generate atmosphere, it perfectly encapsulates Carpenter's revolutionary artistry. It proves that true creative power often comes not from unlimited resources, but from harnessing technical limitations and contradictions to fuel a unique, unforgettable, and deeply unnerving atmosphere. Something to listen for and look for the next time you put on Escape from New York or hear that iconic Halloween theme.